Welcome to our second in the series of winter webinars between HELP and Success by Six, bringing knowledge full circle, Aboriginal children's EDI and community stories. Joseph Dunn is here with us this afternoon, and Kim Bear is also here. Joseph is the Provincial Director of Success by Six, BC. Kim Bear is HELP's Aboriginal Community Liaison Coordinator. In addition, we have two community persons who will be sharing their stories near the end. Ada Mawson and Heidi Cooks-Cardos. Thank you, Joseph. We are going to begin right away, so we look forward to today's webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kim Bear speaking. We are at UBC Vancouver, and this is the traditional territory of the Musqueam people. There's a picture of me on the screen when I was about 4 years old, and I began my career working as a preschool teacher and a daycare supervisor in White Rock. That's a long time ago in 1983, and later I went back to school and finished a degree in psychology and a master's degree in cultural studies. I worked as a child welfare social worker. I worked for NAHO, the National Aboriginal Health Organization, and the BC Coroner's Service doing child death review and Aboriginal child death review. I came to HELP about a year ago, and I'm Métis. My father is German. He's a first-generation Canadian. And my mother is, her roots traced to the Slave Lake Cree and French and Ojibwe from St. Boniface, Manitoba.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph Dunn. I'm the Success by Six Provincial Director. What hopefully you're seeing right now is me a little bit earlier on in my life. Where I grew up was in Northern Ontario, outside the Whitefish River First Nations Reserve, and here you can see in the cold winter sun, as it were, myself and my sister, because that's what it's like right now in Northern Ontario. I guess in terms of what we're hoping to accomplish today is to really shed some light onto both the process, I guess awareness and accessing, and really when we talk about bringing it full circle, discussing different routes that communities have used to use the Aboriginal EDI data in their strategic and community early years planning. So with that in mind, we're going to jump right into it. Certainly if you have any questions along the way, that would be great to just send those in to us as you think of them. Really, the idea of this particular webinar is to deal with all those different questions in your community, with your community tables in the process of your community development process. So with that in mind, we're going to move forward, and we're going to start to talk. Kim is going to give us a nice background of what's going on with the Aboriginal EDI and some of the different innovations in the last while, and then from there we'll shift to a more practical implementation. So over to you, Kim.
Thank you. This is our Aboriginal Steering Committee on the screen. Right now there's 8 members. There's 2 more coming on board, and they guide all of HELP's work, our core research projects, including the Early Childhood Development Instrument, which is an instrument used at the kindergarten level, and the Middle Development Instrument, which is an instrument used at grade 4 and grade 7 level, completed by the children. And they're interested in cultural safety within the instruments, the implementation of the instruments, as well as data sharing. And they advise on our resources, the knowledge translation or communication piece of how our data is shared, and the protocols for the data sharing for Aboriginal communities. And here's a list of where the steering committee is living, including 2 elders, Andrew Yellowback, who's now living in Vancouver, and Jesse Nyberg, who's living in Kelowna right now. So they represent nations from around British Columbia but have roots to around Canada. We've got Métis representation on there as well.
I think what's important to note about this list of the members of the steering committee is that these are people who are living across the province, and they're a great resource to connect with if perhaps in your region or community you'd like to have someone who can speak to what is this whole process about in terms of Aboriginal EDI data, what safekeeping and safeguards are in place, what protocols are being recognized through this process. So these are some great people to support you in your community work and come and talk about some of the successes in communities across the province and also talk about the process of working with this data here at the Human Early Learning Partnership.
And their contact information is available on our website under the Aboriginal Engagement section and the links. And this is also some of the areas that they are interested in. Not just the Aboriginal piece, but here we have all of the data and we want to move this forward. We have folks here like Dr. Paul Kershaw, who's been leading the Generation Squeeze campaign, which is about family policy and child rights, moving forward that agenda. As well, I mentioned the MDI, the Middle Development Instrument, the Early Development Instrument. The Heart-Mind Index is a subscale within the EDI, and the Dalai Lama Center is interested in moving forward with that data and their interest in children and learning and empathy. Dr. Michael Kobar is our social epigenetics specialist, so that's the link between social experiences and their impact on genetics. In the Aboriginal EDI, this information isn't pulled out separately. It's not a separate piece of work. It's the Aboriginal children that are already attending public schools. Although over the years that we've been doing the EDIs, some of the First Nations schools on reserve have participated. And on our website, you can see the print copy of the EDI, of the 104 questions. The Aboriginal Steering Committee was instrumental in changing on the instrument question 11, adding question 11B, which specifically asks about Aboriginal language identification, so the associated group for those children. This is what it looks like on the e-EDI, which is the electronic version. So there's a drop-down box where the teachers can fill in the language. If they don't see the language there, they can add it in, and then we can compile a new list for the following year. Right now, we're up to 74 languages. So these are languages from across Canada, as well as North America, United States.
So Kim, so just to give us a sense of how this process is working in the practical, so a teacher whose responsibility is to do this assessment, how would they go about finding that information about the children who are in their kindergarten class? How does it all happen?
So through the parents, they're asked not to guess. So, or when the child is registered at the beginning of the year in the conversations with the parents, they're asked not to guess.
And is there, certainly I can mention from my experience out in the community that there's a lot to be gained from this type of information being asked and being recognized through the school system, because there is a new awareness from the teacher and, in fact, the school district itself of what are the languages, the language groups of the children who are at that school, and just how broadly that representation is. So there's a lot of an extension from this process beyond the EDI in terms of awareness and I guess learning on behalf of the school districts involved.
And for the identity piece for the children and the families in the community, as well as in some school districts, there are not land-based nations, so it's helpful to know where the children are from when they're allocating resources. For example, there might be a district with a high amount of Métis children or Cree children when those actually are not the land-based languages of the area. So it can help when they're planning to bring in elders or knowledge keepers to speak and interact with the children. And so in our work to move this forward, the elders in the ASC, as well as myself, we've done videos for the teachers, stressing the importance of language recognition. And across the waves, we've had a low recognition of less than 1% to last year, almost 56%, just on the promotion work we've done with this and emphasizing the importance of language recognition. So back to the EDI data, we want to stress a few points about that. One, that no single child is identified through this. This is a population-based data gathering tool. We're looking at trends over time, which are collected through the waves, meaning collections of yearly data in 3-year periods. We don't share the Aboriginal data publicly. I'll get to that process in a second. This is to prevent comparisons between the children in the communities and the school districts, which is not a fair thing to do. And sometimes the contexts are not parallel anyway. And that we're guided by the privacy standards, not only of UBC, but the OCAP, the Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession Guidelines.
So just before we move forward, maybe it's helpful just to make sure to remind you that if for our participants out there across the province, and I recognize that many of you are doing work in Aboriginal early years community development and planning, that if you're wondering about the early development instrument in its more general applications, there's a great amount of resources at on the website of the HELP website. And certainly if you want to follow up with particular questions about making sense of general EDI vulnerabilities and the data and how it's shown in the maps, there is a great amount of resources on that website and through connecting with the HELP staff.
Yeah, the reports for the school districts are online. Just the pullouts for the Aboriginal children's data is not online. So this year we have new reports for the EDI results for Aboriginal children. This is the first time we have these fulsome reports with some context that stress the importance of making meaning with the data in the communities, that we don't just want to give out numbers, we want communities to take the time to find out what those numbers mean to them. And also the language data is included in these reports. So the reports have the vulnerability in the 5 domains that we're measuring: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, and communication skills. And these are vulnerability rates in percentage. So a higher percentage rate means there's less thriving within the children, and it's an opportunity to really look at that area more closely and maybe develop policies or programs or other kinds of responses in collaboration with other data that you have from your schools or programs. So
Kim, some communities, when they are thinking about accessing their Aboriginal EDI data, the immediate response is, well, we know that there are neighborhoods and there are children in our community who are very vulnerable. We don't need to see that pointed out to us anymore. We're aware of that. It's more that we want to act on it. How would you address that kind of perspective?
I think that's why we like to come to the communities and focus on the strengths of the children. So this is just one tool to look at how well children are doing, and that you need to go back to your communities and what are the other contexts, what other data do you have, what other stories are you hearing. It is important because we've been doing this research for a long time now, and that it's one piece that can strengthen your policies or your programs or your information about how well your children are doing over time.
Yeah, I think that sounds like the critical piece, is that it's supporting the work that's already going on in the community, both whether it's anecdotal or the planning process that's working in the early years services. But this is giving something, whether it's corroborating or maybe raising some questions.
Yeah. And so this is the process for the data sharing. In February, the surveys are completed. So really that process starts around Christmas time, December, January, when the letters are going out to the school districts, inviting them to participate in the process. Once the surveys are completed, they come back to HELP, and our data team goes through them. Our knowledge translation team or communications team compiles the reports and the visuals and summarizes the results. And the report packages are sent back to the school district. And it's at that point that the data becomes available for the Aboriginal communities, meaning that request for the data comes to me through by letter, and that will come from the Aboriginal education committees or councils or the First Nation chief and council. And so at the Aboriginal education committee level, when there are 35 children, we can release the data. When there are five or more children, we can release to the chief and councils. And that number is a cutoff rate to protect the privacy of the children.
So that's a very important detail in this accessing of this very important information. And as we continue on in the webinar, we're going to hear of two practical situations where both of those different partners and sources for requesting that information will be explained.
Mm-hmm. And so again, once the report's complete, we hope that we would get invited not just to provide the report, but to come out to the communities or school districts and help have those conversations with you about what the data is meaning for you.
And those kind of conversations, what can a community expect? What's the range of support available?
Anytime, you can call us anytime, even if we've come out to the community, we've had those meetings, feedback of any kind, we always welcome in terms of the data or how the data is presented. We're always looking for feedback to make it more meaningful for communities to use.
And that interpretation process, that knowledge translation, what does that involve in terms of the work that you'd be doing, trying to look at these numbers, the vulnerabilities, look at the language groups? What could a community expect to come out of that, and how would you recommend that they prepare their early years planning tables for that type of information?
Hopefully that we will be able to send the report ahead of time, and that their group, the members of their committee, will have time to go through the report themselves, so that we're not arriving the day of and they don't have time to sort through the information. As well, at any time, again, after we've provided them with the information, we're open to questions, feedback, questions about the data, questions about how the data is presented. Some of the speakers later on will show exactly how they've used it. Within the report are the vulnerability rates, some information about OCAP, the steering committee, the broad picture of Aboriginal vulnerability rates across the province, and then the data specific to the school district, as well as this new Aboriginal language information. And this, what you're seeing on the screen now, is the font size. The larger the font size coincides with the counts of the number of children that we are finding in the data.
So I think what we're hearing is just that there is a lot of information that comes, whether it's in the form of maps revealing vulnerability, showing certainly specific, regional or community-based maps, depending on the population, as well as other information around languages and around the more provincial picture of Aboriginal children in the province.
Yeah, similar to what's on our website now for the public school system, similar information, the maps and their vulnerability rates.
And so just as Kim is moving forward, just a reminder to think, if you have any questions about your particular community, what your some of the issues that you're perhaps imagining or that you've already experienced in terms of apprehension around accessing this data, or bringing it forward, or having, taking the next step of engaging with your community around working with this Aboriginal EDI data. please send us your questions, your thoughts, your perspective, because really that is what we're trying to get at today is what exactly is this, what's its value, and how can it be used. So if you've got any thoughts or questions or concerns, please bring those forward to us, and we'll try and we'll broach those as we move forward.
I'm going to turn this over to Joseph right now. One of the planning tools for using the data, as well as other data in the community, that our steering committee worked on with the Success by Six group, was the Planning for the Seasons toolkit.
Thanks, Kim. And so that toolkit, a really wonderful resource, and if you're not familiar with it already, I'd certainly recommend that you take a look at it. It's available through the Success by Six BC website. And the primary purpose of the Planning for the Seasons guide and resource is to provide a reflection of Aboriginal understandings of planning. So it's developed from an Aboriginal foundation on the values, principles, and processes stemming from traditional ways of supporting children and families, primarily here on the West Coast, but really trying to encompass the cultural activities and traditions that have been guiding planning in Aboriginal communities. So what we're looking at here is just a list of the top 10 benefits of an Aboriginal ECD plan. So it's a little bit playful in that there's clearly lots of different benefits to the idea of planning. But what this resource is really trying to help communities work through is the idea of providing some structure and some direction to where they're going. So just to go through this list very quickly, and what this planning process usually involves is certainly bringing together the stakeholders and the leaders of the community, talking about what kind of research is available. And certainly in our case today, we're thinking about looking at data that's available from the school district, from the health authority, from the Aboriginal EDI maps of vulnerability, and certainly talking about what stakeholders, so service providers, and community leaders are recognizing as the significant factors in guiding planning around supporting the strengthening of Aboriginal early years services. So the outcomes certainly are to try and get some clarity and some purpose about moving forward around particular priorities, whether it's for funding or for coordination of early years programs and services, to really identify what are those needs and priorities. Perhaps it's cultural awareness training for the non-Aboriginal service providers in the community. The range is certainly very community specific, and this process is necessarily very much community based in terms of those identified needs. From there, it's about helping to identify the strategies and some goals for moving forward, how to use the existing resources in a community and starting to think about what resources are needed and where to seek out funding. As well, it's providing a bit of a path for staff to be working in a coordinated fashion. I'm certain many of you on the webinar today have been hearing lots of conversations about trying to move the movement of early years programs and services to a more integrated and combined and collaboratively planned. And a lot of that process, the benefit of it is that staff who are working in early years service provision are seeing ways where they can connect and refer and interconnect the programs so that parents are finding the resources that they really need, regardless of where they enter the pathway that they're looking for. Finally, the results of some of this planning are to strengthen overall the community connections of services, to bring advocacy and inform leadership, certainly of the chief and council of a community, of a territory, and in the wider non-Aboriginal world of funding and service provision, making sure that that the Aboriginal early years planning process is working in combination with other systems and regional planning processes. So all of that just to say that there is a tremendous amount of benefits to working with this data, and more than that, having it become a critical part of the planning process. So to continue on, our next step is to think about how and look at, perhaps in a bit more detail, what is going on in communities after that process of accessing, or during that process of accessing the Aboriginal EDI data has happened. So with that in mind, I'll just very quickly reference that as many of you on the call are involved in this process already of community early years planning, and certainly are familiar with Success by Six and our commitment as a provincial initiative to a central Aboriginal engagement strategy that recognizes self-determination, self-government, culture, language, and tradition as part of our the lens that is at the center of our initiative. I think I wanted to turn our attention, with that in mind, to the engagement process. So we'll shift now to Ada, who is a coordinator with Success by Six in the Cowichan Valley. And Ada is going to give the first of several different stories we're going to look at of what this process, and very much in the early stages of this process of working with her community, supporting them and engaging them to consider the Aboriginal EDI data as a helpful resource in their planning. So I think we're going to shift to Ada now.
Hi, Ada, can you hear us?
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Yes, I can hear you. I have to apologize to some of you if you saw my face earlier. I was primping. I didn't know you could see me, so forgive me, or have a good laugh, because I did. Hello? Are you there?
Yes, Ada. So if you could just tell us a little bit about your experience so far in talking with your community, and some of both the interest and the concerns about this data and how it may be used, and just give us a little bit of a feel for what that process has looked like in starting to start that dialogue.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. I think at first when the EDI came out some time ago, I was a little reluctant to look into it or get actively involved, but my mind has changed over the years as I've learned more about it. I think the hesitancy came from me hearing from within some of our nations that they weren't sure about, or maybe comfortable with, the information being collected, if it was collected in a good way, who was seeing the information, was that going to be a direct, would there be a direct link to each individual child, would our children be judged? But I think as I've learned more about the EDI and how they handle that information in such a sensitive way, it's really opened up, I guess, my mind to possibilities, and actually now seeing and hearing what some of the benefits are. I think it was taking me some time to understand what the Aboriginal EDI looks like, and how we can use the EDI as a tool within our communities and for our nations. I think it gives us a really good framework of perhaps where our children are at, and where some of the strengths are within our children. Because I think it's not always looking at the vulnerability, but it's also looking at the strengths and recognizing, you know, all the good stuff that has been done and working towards. And I think it also opens up a lot of room for dialogue in different ways of using that information, how we access the information, and how do we work within our bands, not just the early childhood educators, but, you know, it's a lot of other people in our bands that are connected to our nations, to say how do we effectively come together and collaborate and how do we interpret that interpretate that information. I think it takes time, and you have to be patient. And I think what I've also heard from some of our nations, I guess they'd say, we already know where our kids are at. What do we need this information for? Is it just another study on our children? And I think those were some valid questions that I've heard. And being able to understand more about the EDI, being able to explain a little bit more, has really been beneficial. This past year, I've been able to sit with the Early Learning Coordinator here in Cowichan and the Aboriginal, oh, sorry, Denise, I can't remember your title. It's the Aboriginal Coordinator for the school district, and being able to sit with them and walk through some of the training, and being able to help deliver the training with my other co-worker for Success by 6. I think it helped me understand more about what the EDI is and how we can really use this information to the best benefit for ourselves and for our kids. I think it's just really taking time to find out what it's all about and not being too scared of it, I guess might be the right word.
And that training that you're talking about, Ada, that's the training that that kindergarten teachers receive prior to their process of I guess their EDI recognition process, their assessment process. Is that what we'd call it?
The new teachers that are coming in to do the EDI each year?
Yeah, we're able to sit with a couple of the kindergarten teachers and kind of walk through with them, with the early learning coordinator and the Aboriginal principal. And I think that for me was really good to see the questions, to see how they were how the information is being collected, and just understanding it is a process, but it was definitely a good start.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that in itself is the beginning of a partnership on that level of looking at how that information is being gathered, and then we can imagine that the next step will be looking at what that information is showing. So it's that piece of connecting with the school district and the teachers and the Aboriginal principal. Certainly, these are some of the key players in moving forward with that conversation.
Yeah, and I've actually been able to talk with a couple of our the chiefs within Cowichan, and even the director of the local Hayat Legal and Friendship Center, and they're very interested in having that data. So I think that if my leaders are saying that we want this data, then I will do everything in my power to make sure that we're able to provide that information with HELP and with school districts and stuff to be able to bring that information to our communities and best utilize it.
I think you brought up a really good point that that when people actually have an opportunity to learn what this data, how it's being collected, and what it may provide, there's a recognition that there isn't a lot of concrete information around the early years, and that this is a piece that can really provide support to other more anecdotal understandings of what are the needs in the community.
Definitely, yeah. But I think it's also another way of exploring and looking at information. I think that I just think it's another way of accessing information and be able to use it along with the even planning for the seasons and incorporating that at the early years table and bringing community together. I think that's a fabulous idea.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ada, for giving us a bit of that piece of your experience so far. And just as I mentioned, it's giving us a sense of what are some of the initial stages of starting to engage with leaders, with the people who are involved in this conversation, and very much with the Aboriginal community, which is at the center of all of this community development work. So thank you, thanks for sharing that with us. And next, we are going to move to another story. And this is coming from the north part of the province, the northeast, as it were, and the Peace River region. And Heidi, who is a Success by 6 coordinator in that region, is going to talk a bit about her story and process that involved working with her community and in a very with lots of perseverance to try and find a champion to support looking at the Aboriginal EDI data and just telling us about what's the pathway since accessing that the community is using that data to inform their planning. So Heidi, are you out there?
So we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Heidi. We're just hoping she'll come online quickly here. If you could just hold tight, we're working on it right now. Heidi, are you there?
Hello.
Great.
Yes, I am, and you unmute me. Hello, everybody, and nice to see so many attendees, like 65. That's great. My name is Heidi Cooks-Cardos, and I live in Dawson Creek and have been with Success by 6 8 years now, and have been also the acting Aboriginal Success by 6 coordinator, even though I am German background, but it has worked out all right so far. We started looking into the e-EDI data early in 2011 because we were working on our South Peace Aboriginal ECD strategic plan. Then in October 2011, Victoria Purdon came to present the planning for the season workshop at our early years conference, which really gave us the push to get going on our strategic plan. So first I contacted our local school district 59 early learning manager who teaches the kindergarten teachers how to complete the EDI assessment, and I am also the community liaison for the EDI data. And this year we actually noticed that one of the Aboriginal languages was missing on the EDI assessment, and we added our local Métis dialect called Mischief. So we have now one more language that was added to the assessments. So the early learning manager sent me to the Aboriginal education manager of our school district, and after some time she got back to me saying that she couldn't help me, and nor could our school district early learning manager. She had no access to the results. So then I contacted HELP and spoke to the then Aboriginal Community Liaison Coordinator, who said that she would get back to me. Now we are already just about a year into trying to get access to these data. And we could not move forward with our strategic plan without knowing what we should focus on. Finally, I heard from HELP and was told that the Aboriginal EDI results are the property of the Aboriginal people, and that we would somehow need permission from one of our local chief and council to access the results. So, well, who to turn to? I went back to my Aboriginal Success by 6 table and put the question to them, who has access to chief and council? Over the 8 years I've been working in Aboriginal Success by 6, I've never been invited to present to Chief and Council. I always had to go through the proper hierarchy and never actually have been able to make a presentation to Chief and Council themselves. In the end, Kim Slack, who is the manager of the West Moberly daycare, preschool, and after-school program, was able to talk to her chief, Roland Wilson of West Moberly First Nation, who gave us permission to access the School District 59 Aboriginal EDI results. I then got Kim connected with Julian Corliss and Kimberly Bayer, who then set the process in motion to get access to the results. And once we had that, I invited the two ladies to come to Chetwynd and present the findings to our community. And
Could
that was
in there for a second,
yes.
Heidi? So just to give us a sense, because it certainly sounded like you were trying every pathway you could to find interest and engagement with this information. So to what do you attribute that you had a bit of, I guess, a breakthrough in terms of having this particular chief recognize the value of this information, or the potential value to his community, um, to move forward and really take a leadership role?
Well, I think it's because Kim Slack was able to convince him that we needed the vulnerabilities in order to finish articulating our strategic plan, because we were stuck. We didn't know what to focus on, what action plan to move forward, because we didn't know where the highest vulnerabilities lay. And once we had that, it ended up like all falling into place, and we ended up with a finished South Peace Aboriginal ECD strategic plan, which now, of course, we have to implement. Now, really, the real hard work begins, because now we do have the plan, and then now what?
So to explain that process in a little bit more detail, so with the presentation to your community of that data, could you just give us a little bit of a portrait of how that event took place, and what were the types of questions and concerns and recognitions that came out of that before people decided in your early years planning tables that this was something of value and something that would guide your planning?
Well, first of all, the attendance at the workshop was not very great. We had mostly representation from my Aboriginal Success by 6 table and then School District 59. But we were disappointed that not more people came out. But in a way, we attributed it to the fact that the general population isn't aware of the EDI assessment. So we had maybe 12 people present, but the people who were there left very great comments, and I have a synopsis of the comments here. First of all, out of 1 to 5, they gave mostly 4s and 5s to the presenters and to the content of the presentation, being very satisfied with what they heard. And they made comments like, now I understand our community. It was an excellent presentation. It was organized and well planned. It was relevant, lots of discussion and feedback, which they really liked. That came up several times, that people liked the interaction, lots of sharing. I found the presentation material clear, which helped guide the group discussion. It was nice, even with some technical difficulties that we had. Another comment was, we needed more Aboriginal service providers present. And another comment was that I thought it was a great workshop, easy to digest and helpful to guide our community initiatives and programs like Kindergarten Day for D-Day, with the results that we heard from the UBC delegates. So all around, very, very positive contents, and I found all of it very, very gentle, and we didn't call it assessment, we didn't call it data. We tried to play down the whole sort of testing assessment piece and made it more of a community conversation to bring awareness around the EDI data, period.
And so, Heidi, if I could just jump in there. So, because I know some of the questions that other communities are asking are, who are these people who are sitting around the table? And in some places, as you mentioned, it may be a principal who's focused on Aboriginal programming with the school district. And in your case, you said most of the people who are working and looking at and being part of that conversation were part of your Success by 6 Aboriginal Council. So to give us a picture of what sort of people around the table, who are these Aboriginal early years stakeholders that were participating and looking at the data?
Okay, we have representation from 2 friendship centers. Their executive directors attend, and we have representation from one of the daycare centers, two of the daycare centers, and Head Start, and Mawson Flats Mates Association, and Aboriginal Family Services at times as well. So we have about 6 regular partners who sit at the Success by 6 table. representing the 6 or 7 Aboriginal organizations we have in the South Peace, and then we sometimes have representation from the Aboriginal education management of the school district.
Great, thanks.
So those are the people. The people, but no, I don't think any parents came out, and nobody that might have shown interest in it. That was it was hard getting people to sign up, because again, it's because of the lack of awareness around the EDI assessment and how you can use the results.
And that's a very helpful comment, though, that when we're thinking about stakeholders and the people that we'd like to be involved in these conversations, that to have parents at the center, and certainly elders providing guidance to our process as well. Certainly in other communities, it's been found to be a very beneficial part of that process when possible.
Mm-hmm. But we are certainly very happy to now have a finished plan, and as I said, the real work is beginning, and the whole process was 2 years, I would think. Well, 2.5 years by the time we finished the plan, because we only meet 4 or 5 times a year. But now it's done, and I gladly share it with anybody who would like to have a copy of it. I can send it to you, Joseph, and you can disseminate it as you feel fit.
And could you just explain to us, in just a little bit more detail, moving from looking at these maps, looking at language groups and the consideration of vulnerabilities, how did that get translated into a strategic plan and priorities and goals for your region?
Well, we really looked where the highest vulnerabilities lay, and in our area it is physical health and well-being because of our long winters. So then we decided we must have recreation programs available for winter months, for example, and we are looking at an indoor recreation facilities that would be accessible to our First Nations families. And another one was language and cognitive development. So there again, we looked at the school readiness piece that then daycare centers and preschools could start to focus on to help Aboriginal children get ready for this self-regulation kindergarten entry level that is now demanded by the school district. And we showed the vulnerabilities in our plan, which of course is only accessible to the people that need to know, so that it is not public knowledge where the vulnerabilities lie.
Right. So that's an important piece, is that certainly this information was guiding the process, but as Ada mentioned as well, there's a tremendous amount of sensitivity around who in the community has access to this data.
Yeah, so we certainly haven't made it public. It's only the table members have a copy of the plan, and it helps us guide our future action. And every time we have a meeting, we look at it and start attacking another one of the action points.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Heidi, for sharing your pathway, and as I mentioned, your resilience in finding a way to access this data, and then to continue to moving forward and supporting and engaging the learning that was already present with your Aboriginal Council, and ensuring that they had more material, more information to guide their decisions and process.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Thanks. So moving forward, we'll go to our next story. Before we do that, just a reminder: if you're hearing the conversations and the stories that we're telling, and you're thinking to yourself, well, that sounds a bit familiar, that sounds like the experience that I've had, but it's a little bit different in my community as it necessarily would be, please feel free to send us any questions or any thoughts, or as we heard with Ada, there is likely to be some apprehension and some suspicion even around when you're starting to talk about things like assessment and and evaluation. There's a lot of room for uncertainty and confusion about what's behind this collection of data. So if you've got some questions about that, please share those with us. But with that, while you're thinking about that, I'll just tell you one final story, and this is from the Comox Valley, where I had the distinct pleasure of being a regional coordinator over the last several years. And in that community, unlike in Heidi's case, there was a situation where there was a very well-established Aboriginal Early Childhood Development Council, which was very connected to the school district. And that school district principal was, as soon as he became aware of the possibility of accessing this data, he quickly made certain that we were able to receive that data. And within just a few brief months, we had a presentation with that council and representatives from the Human Early Learning Partnership, really to a large extent explaining what that data was showing, because we were having trouble making head or tail of it. We could see there are vulnerabilities, but we didn't know what to make of them. So after really a day and a half of consideration and discussion and looking at the data and comparing it with what was already a very well-documented regional Aboriginal early years needs assessment, that council, that Aboriginal ECD council in the Comox Valley, was able to say, yes, in fact, a lot of the needs that we've identified and the areas, the priority areas of focus that we need to be supporting are being corroborated by this Aboriginal EDI maps and research. And with that in mind, the council had sort of a renewed enthusiasm and a focus to the work that they were doing. They recognized that though there are many different priorities, there was one that had been identified. And as we heard in Heidi's story, thinking about the language and cognitive development, that domain was the one that really stood out as having a particularly high vulnerability over a large number of years. So with that in mind, there was a clear consensus that was going to be the focus of that council in seeking out funding for a Aboriginal-specific speech therapist for the community, recognizing that there were not only were there issues around wait lists, but also around having resources around speech and language development that were probably not as culturally appropriate, and there wasn't, I guess, a significant cultural awareness in the resources that were currently available. So the Aboriginal Head Start program in that community was able to take the first step forward in applying for funding, and that application significantly had not only the support of the Aboriginal ECD Council for the region, but had the added benefit of being supported by a community needs assessment that had established that priority, and the Aboriginal EDI data, which made it very clear in a very concrete way that this was a recognized vulnerability that needed addressing. So with that clarity of mind and support and consensus, within a few brief months, that funding was acquired and that position was filled. And the results, I guess, can stand as a bit of an impressive model of what can happen in terms of putting together the pieces, putting together some leadership and some conviction around working with the research, and then bringing through to a fruition the application of that into planning and making a difference in the services that are available to families in that community. So there's certainly there's some long stories and some short stories about working with this data. There's some difficulties around accessing it if there isn't leadership and a commitment by one of these two pathways that Kim explained to us earlier for accessing the data. But once these can be overcome, there's a tremendous amount of momentum that can be gained and a certain amount of clarity that can accompany the discussions around and the interpretations of this data. So with that in mind, we're getting to the end of our talking for this afternoon. We certainly wanted to come back to the idea that that EDI results are in fact just one piece of the child development picture, not the whole picture. And Kim, did you have some thoughts about when we're trying to look at this in a broader, more holistic way? And your work, I guess recently up in the Whistler area, I know you had lots of experiences about what that process can look like and how it's just a piece of the process.
Yeah, that's another community who's not only looking at our data, they're looking at information and stories from their own community to develop their plan. One thing I would suggest is really taking a good look at our website. There's a lot of information in there about our steering committee, as well as our EDI, our MDI, the middle years development instrument, and links to our YouTube channel, which has some of the videos that the teachers are going through, so you can have a look for yourself to see what the teachers are seeing.
And what kind of video information? What's that all about?
There's information in there. There's one where I'm talking about the process for the EDI with the teachers, the importance. The steering committee is talking about the importance of language and identity, and that we're really mindful of all of that here at HELP.
Great. And so as we near the end of our time here, we do have a couple questions that have come in. So I think we'll take a look at those, and as you're listening to those, if you have any other, please send them in now. But if you want to return at a later time with once you've had a moment to think about this and digest all of this different information we've been giving, you'll certainly be able to follow up with myself or Kim for questions specific to either the Aboriginal EDI data or the process of working with it and the strategic planning process. So the first question, Amy?
First question. In terms of language recognition, can we assume it is simply an association as opposed to speaking the language?
That's right, and it's worded that way in the guide for the teachers. So in the definition of what they're looking for, it's the association. It's not whether the child or anyone in their family speaks the language.
And so what that means, once again, if you're not haven't had much experience or had a chance to look at the website or have much background, the information that would come through in the report would identify what are the different language groups and what percentage of the population of children and by extension families in that community are connected to a particular language group. So as Kim mentioned earlier, you could appreciate how that would provide some good helpful insight into where to direct and where to look for resources and programming based on the language groups that are of significant proportion in the community.
Right.
The second question, when you collect info on Aboriginal language, do you also note dialects?
Dialects? There's a section in the EDI that tracks ESL or the language as a dialect. So it might mean that the child is growing up in a home where the dialect is a First Nations dialect, the language that's been carried on in the home, as opposed to something that is a second language. So we're able to capture that information.
And I guess what's important is this is an evolving process with the Aboriginal Steering Committee here at HELP. It's a very active group, and they're very much committed to bringing this lens to all of the work that's happening here. And as you can see, just over the last couple of years, there have been some really dramatic improvements in awareness about both the Aboriginal EDI data, but more so even the a lens that's being brought to the research work here. Right. So I think we can anticipate even more specificity and more definition about this work in coming years.
That's right.
Another question. In our area, there are a lot of Aboriginal children who seasonally migrate from remote areas to our city. Is there a way with the EDI to find out where the children are from?
Where the children are from in terms of, well, it's capturing at a point in time in February. So if your language, for example, is Michif, you carry that with you wherever you go. So
but I guess in terms of how they would be collected in terms of the mapping, so that is based on their postal code, right, at a certain period of time. So in that sense, they would be located based on their particular address when that assessment is happening in the new year, each year by their school teacher.
The data is captured in the February of each year, so where the child is living at that time. But there might be children who, and this is why it's interesting to collect this information, that children who have a land-based language are not living in their home territories. So it may be important for a district that to note that there's a lot of children, for example, with oil and gas industry, that there's a lot of children moving in from neighboring regions. It'd be helpful to know that.
And the last question at the moment, someone is curious about how the data is protected and once the data is released specifically.
Yeah, that's why we have the strict protocol for how the data is released, only to Chief and Council or to the Aboriginal Education Councils, and that's why we prefer to go out to the communities to stress the importance of not making the comparisons with other Aboriginal groups or with the public school system. The data is housed here at HELP in a secure, locked red zone. Even some of the staff here don't have access to the data. It's the data team that's looking after the data. Something else related to that?
Well, I think it's important that these early years Aboriginal councils that we've been hearing about throughout our webinar today, these are made up of Aboriginal service providers, in some cases non-Aboriginal service providers working in Aboriginal service provision. But there is, in all cases with these councils, there's a very clear protocols in terms of reference that have been established around maintaining those kind of high levels of respect for, I guess what would we call that? The
cultural safety.
The cultural safety,
privacy.
Yeah, and privacy of the information.
And certainly everyone who's a member of the Aboriginal Steering Committee, this is always something that they're mindful of, front and center, the safety of the kids, the privacy, preventing comparisons, preventing what we see a lot that happens out there is these broad reports, framing things that come from a place of weakness rather than strength, and we want to prevent that because actually a lot of our children are doing really well.
Great. Amy, any other questions?
No.
Okay, well, I think with that in mind, we're going to draw our session to a close. We certainly, before I turn it over to Kim, I just wanted to thank everyone for participating, and just a reminder that if you're interested in that resource that I was referring to earlier, Planning for the Seasons, there is a link that's available as part of the webinar slides. It's also available through the Success by 6 BC website under the resources section. And it's certainly a great resource to help you in your community planning process. And just a reminder that we will be doing 2 more webinars in this series, so to look forward to those dates when they're being sent out. And before I turn it over to Kim, I just wanted to once again thank the Human Early Learning Partnership for the great work they're doing in coordinating these webinars and giving people across the province an opportunity to learn about this important data, and as we've talked about, to bring it full circle in its application in community. So Kim?
Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today, and as well Joseph for coming by, and Amy and all of the HELP team for helping us with the technology. It can be very frustrating, but Amy's an expert at this. And again, please visit our website. I hope you take the time to visit there, look at the maps, the EDI data, as well as our middle development instrument data, and the section from the Aboriginal engagement with the background of the steering committee. And hope to chat with you at the next webinar.